coverage because you know something isn't right. The rent is too damn high. Big tech is implementing its AI agenda from a surveillance state to AI data centers without the public's input at all. Masked ICE agents are roaming our streets and kidnapping our loved ones, and we're entering yet another ruthless, unwanted war for oil. And this is all happening while local journalism is collapsing, while politicians on both sides of the aisle capitulate to corporate interests, and while billionaires take control of our media. And meanwhile, for over 5 years, More Perfect Union has covered issues that working people deeply feel, largely issues not covered by mainstream media or politicians. Following the money, exposing greed and corruption, and showing the everyday people coming together to fight back. At More Perfect Union, we believe that stories have power to inform, inspire, and to catalyze chain reactions of effective organizing from one community to the next, which we saw with More Perfect Union's relentless coverage of the fight against AI data centers across the country. But here's the thing. We can't be everywhere. We can't cover every campus and every town. We need you. And that is why we're opening up our newsroom and launching More Perfect University. We're bringing students together online, like we're doing tonight, on campuses, and through stories. I'm going to briefly talk about what that looks like and how you can plug in, and then I'm going to pass it off to Jack Cocchiarella and Lina Khan. The first is a student reporting network. We want to train, support, and partner with students across campuses to tell stories about the economic issues facing their communities and how us regular folks are coming together to do something about it. If you have a story that needs to be told, pitch it to us, and we will help you tell it. The next is campus events, led by both More Perfect Union and students, whether that be tabling and Q&As or debates and town halls. We want to bring students together across all parts of campus life to build community and the power required to take on the 1%. And the last is a national digital community via Discord, which you should join tonight, to actually directly connect students across campuses to each other, to collaborate and build cross-campus campaigns that can take on the powers that be. And so if this sounds like the right place for you, and you're excited to join a movement for the 99%, can I get a hell yeah in the chat? Hell yeah. So it is an absolute honor to welcome Lina Khan and Jack Cocchiarella onto the call tonight. I'm going to play a quick clip of a More Perfect Union piece covering the incredible work of Lina Khan, and then I'm going to pass it on to the both of them. Thank you so much for being here, and join More Perfect University.
When did Lina Khan get so animated around a vision of wanting to address economic justice, particularly corporate power in America?
You know, from an early age, I was interested in being a journalist. And one reason why I wanted to be a journalist was because at their best, they hold power to account. After college, I ended up working for an organization where my job was instead to look at how different markets were structured. One of the first areas I did this work was in poultry farming. You have millions of consumers on one end, thousands of farmers on the other end, but they're connected just by a very small number of companies. And practically, that can mean that for a chicken farmer, their entire livelihood is just dependent on one company. And so that company has huge amounts of power over them. And so it was just a clear picture of how concentrated economic power, concentrated corporate power is ripe for abuse.
Hello, y'all, and thank you so much for joining us, Lina, as well, with your very busy schedule. I'm very excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and I hope so is everyone else who joined. I'm especially excited to speak with you tonight because obviously you came to your career originally intending to be a journalist, and I was wondering how that original pursuit of journalism, holding powerful people to account, still what you do today, led you to the career of scaring the shit out of executives across America. Was there a specific story at your high school or college paper that helped kind of spur on some of the same ideas and outlook that you use today in your career?
Well, first of all, it's so great to be here. Congratulations on the launch of More Perfect University. I've been such an admirer of More Perfect Union for several years now, and the way that it really brings to light the voices and perspectives of working class Americans, especially at a moment where so much of local journalism has collapsed, and those types of voices are pretty absent, especially from elite discourse. So I've just been a huge, huge fan of More Perfect Union, and I'm so excited for the launch of More Perfect University. I was originally interested in pursuing journalism because it did seem that at its best, journalism is a way to hold power to account. I was, in middle school during the illegal invasion of Iraq, and just saw during that time what an important role independent, hard-hitting journalism did to hold power to account, to expose, abuses in government. And it really made a big impression on me. And it was something that, informed my wanting to pursue journalism, which I did through high school, into college. And then shortly after college as well, where I first started researching markets and abuse of corporate power. In terms of a specific story, I remember in college, one of the stories that our local paper exposed was that one of the professors at the college had actually defrauded the college. He had fraudulent credentials, and it actually ended up unveiling a deeper issue, which is that the college had seemed to turn a blind eye to a lot of red flags and suspicious signals about this professor because he had a lot of ties to Washington, D.C., and was kind of placing people in internships. And it just was this, microcosm of how access to power can create too laxer standards and people looking the other way. Beyond that, in my work after college, it was really a tour through all sorts of markets that have become concentrated, that have become monopolized, and how that leads to all sorts of abuse for working people, be it farmers or rideshare drivers. And it's something that, continue to inform my work.
Yeah, and I think that the same way that you were able to, and speaking to the kind of exposing that corruption, I think the work of journalism, I think now in a time in which it's so difficult to get people's attention, is to make things more digestible and to tell people that they can still have a hand in actually seeing real change. Certainly, you did that at the FTC. And I want to talk about, we could actually rattle off a million accomplishments, near total complete non-compete clause, bans, click to cancel junk fees. There's so much more that we could talk about. But how did those fights, how did they look like? What did they look like inside? I know so many people hear about the victories afterwards, but what did those look like inside for people who kind of see what's happening in the day to day, certainly the Trump administration, but maybe their local government, maybe their college, and think that I can't maybe be a part of this change, but your fight certainly inspires that. What do people not see on the inside?
Well, the first step is making sure you're picking the right fights and deciding which fights to pick in the first instance. One thing that was incredibly important to us at the FTC was, we were a small agency. We didn't have a ton of, a huge number of people. We didn't have a huge number of resources. We didn't have, too much time. And so we needed to be very focused on taking on the biggest pain points in people's lives. And so that first of all meant making sure we were hearing from people to understand what were those pain points. We would hear repeatedly about just the unaffordable cost of healthcare and how people themselves or had family members rationing life-saving medicine, people who, had had loved ones pass away because they were skipping doses of insulin. We would hear from parents who had lost their kids to abuse on social media. We would hear from workers that were locked in by these non-compete clauses. And so the direct stories that we were hearing from working class Americans across the country, first of all, informed how we decided to prioritize our work and what issues we decided to even pay attention to. Beyond that, you really need to make sure that if you're filing a lawsuit, you're bringing the best case possible, the strongest case possible. The other side, these corporate defendants have huge amounts of resources to sink into these litigations in ways that the government doesn't. And so you need to really make sure you have all the facts on your side, you're bringing the best case legally, and that you're telling a compelling story. Judges at the end of the day are people too, and you need to make sure that why you're bringing the lawsuit, who it's defending, and what the overall story is something that's landing for that judge as well. The other thing is you need to make sure that you're actually engaging the public, both to hear from them, but also to communicate back to them what it is that you're doing and who you're fighting for. Because you see enormous pushback from those corporate interests. The second that corporate America gets wind of anything that will be, potentially chipping away at some of their wealth and power, you see a huge flurry and the activation of this huge ecosystem in DC, where they're kind of flooding the zone, kind of, calling members of Congress that they know, calling kind of ex-members of Congress that are now lobbyists, and the kind of full influence machine activates. And in order to be able to create some countervailing power to that, you need to make sure that you're actually engaging the public, the people who will actually be benefiting from, so that the policymakers don't just have a very one-sided view, thinking, oh, if we do this policy, we're getting all of this backlash, and not recognizing all the benefits that it's going to provide. So those were just some of the components that ended up being important to pursuing these fights.
I don't know if you've seen this meme, but it's on like one side, it's the Trump administration and everything's on fire, and Don Jr. has made $3 billion off of a Bitcoin with a different name, a crypto whatever scheme, and then like on the other side, it's like it's Mayor Mamdani's New York, and things are happening, and people's material conditions are improving, and so on and such. And I feel like that stark contrast in this time is like the corruption and the rot in the government that we see in Washington makes it difficult to believe that things are possible. But then again, you look at some of the work, of course, that you've done with Mayor Mamdani, and I want to speak to that in a second. But people actually feel, okay, once I begin to understand how government works, and of course it becomes a little easier on the local level. And that's why more perfect union is so important, explaining how these things work on the national level. But do you think we're at a time in which the feeling about battling corruption is getting better or getting worse? I know I don't want to set you up for saying worse, but what are the ways that you've seen it gotten better, I guess I should say?
I mean, it's worth just noting that the levels of corruption that we're seeing are just grotesque and blatant to an extent that, I think you'd have to go back quite some decades for that level of just extreme grotesque corruption. And I think it's really just a wake-up call for, how corrosive this is to our democracy, and how outsized power and outsized concentrations of wealth and power is just fundamentally hostile to and incompatible with our democracy. And if we're, going to chart our way out of this current predicament, making sure that we're taking on these central challenges of money in politics, but also just the extreme concentrations of economic power in the first instance, is going to be absolutely vital and absolutely top of the agenda. Being in DC, one thing that can be quite shocking is the ways in which all sorts of more subtle forms of corruption kind of become normalized. And I think, the rot is very, very deep. And even when you didn't have moments of, people in the White House directly trading on, information, and just mass corruption everywhere. Even before we got to that, I think there were forms of corruption in a very deep way that are important to take seriously, and really have fed into Americans' disillusionment with government, and a sense that we don't have leaders across government that are always fighting for working people, and instead seem to be, improving the wealth and position of the already powerful.
Well, fortunately, we do have some, and you worked alongside one of them, or you work alongside one of them in Mayor Mamdani. One of the accomplishments that comes to mind that y'all were able to show, look, we actually can do things no matter how big or small anyone thinks they might be, is being the first city in the nation to ban subscription traps. And certainly there's more work to be done. Potholes are being filled every day, or maybe we've tackled every single last one of them. But what were you mapping out, aside from like making sure that Bill Ackman was melting down every day on Twitter? What were y'all or what were y'all planning out initially before his administration began? As like here not only is here what we want to accomplish, but here's what we want to communicate. Because I feel like those things have gone so hand in hand, especially of course in your career, but alongside Mayor Mamdani as well.
Yeah, I mean, the mayor ran a campaign that galvanized a unprecedented swath of people across New York City.
Yeah.
And you had people cast a vote for him who had never before voted in a local election. And it was just an incredible degree of civic participation, of civic engagement, of people who had lost hope and trust in our electoral system and our political system, feeling an inkling of that hope again and deciding that, they were going to put their faith behind 34-year-old mayor. And
As they
one
should.
thing, and one thing that was really important to the mayor was making sure that people's involvement and engagement in government did not just end after they cast a ballot.
Yeah.
And he wanted to think about how do we make sure that people are staying engaged and are actually participating in governing in a day-to-day sense. And so that's been a top priority for him and something that, he was sharing with his team from the minute he got elected. There have been a few things he's done in that vein. He's created a new office of mass engagement, whose job it is centrally to make sure that broader swaths of New York City are being consulted or being engaged in questions about how to govern. One example of this was the mayor held rental ripoff hearings, one in every borough, which were open to any New Yorker who could come and talk directly to top officials across the government to share what are the pain points that they've seen with housing. What are they seeing from landlords, be it, unresponsive landlords, really horrible conditions that are going unaddressed, what kinds of fees are being tacked on, just all the problems, big and small, that people across this city have to deal with. And actually, right after being inaugurated, that same very day, the mayor actually visited a tenant's apartment, and there were kind of clips of him kind of looking at the decrepit situation, and just how so many of these living conditions are actually unlivable and sometimes are not safe and have been like this for a very, very long time because there hasn't been adequate effort to hold landlords accountable towards their rights and responsibilities. So, making sure that City Hall is directly opening its doors to the people of New York City and hearing from them on a day-to-day basis is something that's very important.
Yeah, and I'll have to say for anyone who was there that day, it took me about like 30 minutes to thaw my feet afterwards. So immediately getting to work on top of that was incredibly impressive for how cold it was. But students and I've been looking through the chat. It's some people asking, okay, well then how do I? Obviously, the question is then how do I get involved? At the local level, what is your encouragement for maybe not just of course in New York City, but all across the country? What is your advice to students on their campuses who want to start getting involved? And what does that look like even in small ways? Again, I think in your work, in the work of Mayor Mamdani, people have realized that although we are tackling big systems here, it is not so much so that there are not small systems that you can take on as well and create meaningful change, and that you can affect things at the local level and the national level. What would be your advice, maybe big and small, to students on campuses wanting to get involved? Besides, of course, joining More Perfect University. Cheap plug there.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many opportunities, big and small. Oftentimes the there are a whole set of decisions that are being made at the local level, that create opportunities for input and participation, even outside of New York City. Just to give a few examples, anytime a utility company wants to hike rates, they oftentimes have to put forward a proposal to the local utility commission, and then that is open for public comment. And whether commissioners hear from people about, whether they think that these rate hikes are justified or not justified is really matters and informs their decision making. And so sometimes all you'll see is, proposals from the utility commission and their lobbyists, and not really too much opposition on the other side. And that can really skew the decision making process. And so anytime, there's an opportunity for public comments, that can be incredibly important. And especially at the local level, I think you see not a whole lot of participation sometimes. And so, even a few comments can really make a difference to reflect the broader public interest. Oftentimes, there are also opportunities to try to figure out, is my government really standing up for me and doing everything it can?
Hmm.
I think for students that are really interested in policy research and legal research, this is something that is really good to do. For New York City, we were looking through the city code, and trying to figure out, what are the tools and authorities that are at the government's disposal that perhaps are being neglected, but they should be using. That's an exercise that anybody in America can engage in and pursue, no matter your locality. Look at your city laws, your state laws, and figure out for the issues that you care about, what are the authorities at the disposal, and are our public servants and public officials really being faithful to their obligation to protect the public interest, given the tools that they have. Beyond that, there are oftentimes local meetings and opportunities. Right now there's a big question around data centers and
Yeah.
whether communities are okay with, I know, data centers emerging in their backyards, with all sorts of potential consequences on costs, on, water quality. And we're seeing, a real tidal wave of civic involvement, civic engagement, community meetings. And so those are all just some ways to be getting involved.
Yeah, there's a lot to do, even if you're not on a campus in New York City. But if you are, you might be on a campus like my alma mater, Columbia. I wanted to, of course, give the MPU plug, but I also wanted to say that you recently launched the Center for Law and the Economy at Columbia Law School. Congratulations, very exciting. What is it that you originally set out to accomplish with the program? What are the goals, the intentions? I'm interested. I'm excited.
Yeah, so it's been really exciting, and there have been a few key goals. One is, we've been living in this kind of 40-year anomalous period where we really suspended some of the key laws and policies that were about making sure we had an economy that was working for working people. And as we look to get our way out of this, it's clear we're going to need a really deep bench of people who are able to go into government and be effective public servants, to make sure government is actually serving working people. And one thing that's been so exciting and encouraging over the last few years is just the surge of interest among young people.
Yeah.
I've gotten countless emails from students, including high school students sometimes, saying, I'm studying the Trust Busters and Ida Tarbell, and how do I kind of get involved in this work and kind of taking on the monopolies of the 21st century. And I think there sometimes isn't an obvious place to go in terms of getting that training, as a matter of research and policy, but also as a matter of really making sure we're setting up students and young people to be key leaders, in making sure we actually have an economy that is really compatible with our democratic values. So that's what we're going to be looking to do, providing programming, providing research opportunities, having annual awards. And so I'm really excited that we'll be doing that. It is based at Columbia, but the goal is to really have it be nationwide. And so anybody at any school across the country can tap in and get engaged.
I heard about another nationwide program, but I'm going to save a little bit of a plug for that for the end. Have you heard the term enshittification?
Yes.
So I heard Elizabeth Warren talking about merger after merger after merger, acquisition after acquisition, and discussing it through the lens of enshittification, how our lives in the ways that maybe aren't covered exactly in the Wall Street Journal are just getting worse because more of the same stuff is owned by the same people, and their bad views are put upon us, and your TV shows aren't as good, and Netflix doesn't know how to light anything, and everything looks like a Verizon commercial, and that's not great. What is the Maybe if you have a friend who doesn't necessarily someone who's always saying like, "Ah, I don't really like politics, I don't care. What is like the rabbit hole that you've found kind of works for people to finally see it's maybe of a different lens. Okay, there seems to be a lot of people controlling the same stuff and it's not benefiting me. Is there like a specific story? I know you have countless, but is there one that you like to tell to someone who's maybe like a young person who doesn't like the system of politics that we have, understandably, but that kind of starts to open their mind a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, we see it in so many places. I think one classic example is just even social media.
Mhm.
When Facebook bought out WhatsApp, there was a real question as to whether the fact that WhatsApp had actually, protected people's privacy was something that was going to be maintained. And at that point, Facebook said, yes, of course, we're going to, make sure WhatsApp stays very privacy protecting. They bought them up, and a few years later, WhatsApp was selling people's data in the same way that Facebook had been. More generally, I think, if you go to the grocery store, sometimes if you go down an aisle, there will be a lot of variety and it will look like there's a lot of competition. But actually, even when you see, dozens of brands of laundry detergents or diapers or snacks, those are actually just controlled by a very small number of companies, two or three. And you really see quality degrade. And I think you see a broader phenomena across all parts of our economy where companies act like they are too big to care, like they can, get away with making products worse. I think a classic example of this is Ticketmaster Live Nation.
Yeah.
Anybody who's tried to buy a ticket to a concert or, a live event, and, sometimes the website breaks down, it's just overloaded. There's no real accountability. There are all sorts of junk fees that have been tacked on. So, you're waiting in line in the online queue, and then you finally get your ticket. It's advertised for, $45, but then by the time you get to checkout, it's somehow $75 and they're $30 and, all sorts of fees, convenience fees, service fees, an email fee, and you have no idea what these fees are actually for, but you have no discretion and no ability to opt out. And it can just feel like a bait and switch and coercive, right? And there's no alternative, there's no real other choice. And so I think that those are the types of example where in your day-to-day seeing more and more forms of nickel and diming and companies being able to exploit you or take advantage of you, because you have no other options. I think that really gets to the heart of what we've seen in so many different spaces.
So you're saying that the Swifties can be radicalized maybe a little bit faster than other young people can?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you had that incident a couple of years ago, you definitely started seeing Swifties talking about antitrust.
Well, where would you pass them along? I always hate for the book recommendation. Maybe is there or any other piece of media? Again, maybe my generation is reading a little bit less. Please, everyone, stop using ChatGPT so you still have gray matter in your brain. But what is then the next pass along? I'm trying to and this is obviously, of course, a part of what More Perfect University is going to be doing with organizing and kind of helping people see the light of so much of what you've done. What is then the next step? Again, maybe we're not going to call it a radicalization. We should call it a radicalization journey for someone who starts to see, okay, this quality is getting worse. Things are all the same, but different in bad ways. What is then the next step to keep someone kind of compelled in that story?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are more and more resources for getting more and more informed about this and how it's playing out in a day-to-day way. MPU's videos often do really great deep dives into these issues. You also have outlets like the American Prospect, which is doing really fantastic investigative reporting, ProPublica. Matt Stoller runs a Substack called Big, that is oftentimes shedding light on all sorts of weird monopoly problems across the economy and big fights around it. So those are just some of the places that I think you can go to learn more about these issues, as well as think about, how to get involved, as we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, and of course, More Perfect University is a great way to do so. This program is launching right now to help students speak truth to power, to learn how to tell these stories. Obviously, Elise is such a great example of that, and to organize on campus, to take on the 1%. Um, this is a layup, and I think you'll have a great answer. But why is this? Why is this an organization? Why is this an undertaking that you see as so important that you were so gracious? And I say again, thank you so much for giving your time.
Scrutiny is brought to you by Americans
Wanted to
United
start. Strict scrutiny is also important. Maybe we'll plug them a little bit later, though. Why is this? What speaks to you about what's happening right now with More Perfect University?
Well, look, I think, we are really at a tipping point in terms of just the level of free fall that we're in as a country in terms of attacks on the rule of law. And a lot of young people in particular are just so disillusioned, not just with our politics, but you oftentimes hear people refer to the state of the economy as a scam economy, right? There's just this sense that there's so much corruption and not. It's important to remember that we didn't just magically get here, that this was the result of very specific legal and policy choices to really rig the economy in this direction. And if we're going to get out of this, I think it's really going to be a generational change that is going to help get us there. I think younger generations are really bearing the brunt of the economic decisions that were made several decades ago. And so it's incredibly important that we see kind of a broader set of young people really get ready for this fight, because the stakes are enormously high. And I think these are the generations that are going to be most impacted.
Yeah, and I want to stay on that a little bit more because we've kind of talked a bit about how to make sure that you can get your friends involved to kind of open their eyes a little bit. I saw your Adam Friedland appearance, and I thought to myself, that is the Joe Rogan of the left right there. You are you are incredible and compelling in telling these stories. I'm sorry that that phrase gets tossed around too much. But what advice do you give to young people who want to be able to talk to their friends or their parents or anyone in their community about corruption, about this scam economy in a way that is aspirational in nature, and it wants people to it gets people to want to be excited and to want to get involved with MPU and doing more organizing? What is the way that we communicate that isn't as doom and gloom, because it's kind of all we see all the time?
I think really focusing on the fights where people have won is incredibly important, because I do think that sometimes you see a real sense of inevitability that can set in, and a sense that there's nothing that can be done. I think we've seen that even more recently. I mean, when there's a huge multi-billion-dollar merger that's been proposed involving Paramount and Warner, that would concentrate even more power in the Allison family. And, for a while, we were hearing a lot from Hollywood actors and directors and screenwriters and others about how this was going to be a terrible merger for them. But there was a sense of, maybe it's not worth fighting. Are we just going to risk retaliation? And then the other week, there was a public letter that had thousands of signatories, A-list Hollywood actors and actresses putting their name behind, saying, we don't want this merger. We think this is going to be terrible for the industry. It's going to result in worse quality jobs, fewer jobs, worse experience for the viewing public. As well as a corrosive effect on democracy, where we're concentrating even more power in the hands of, in this case, literally one family, to determine what type of ideas and what type of art and what type of content get produced and get disseminated. And so I think, even seeing that small movement where we initially saw a sense of resignation and a sense of inevitability, to now people kind of gearing up for a real fight and saying, this is not an inevitability. This seems to be an illegal merger. And if the federal government's not going to stop it, we have the state attorneys general who have the ability to do so, and we're going to support them in doing so. I think, really being very specific about what can be done to actually turn and help steer away from the extreme concentration of economic power is important to focus on, to underscore that this is not some inevitability.
Yeah, and it's got to make you feel a little bit better. Obviously, during your time in the Biden administration, there are so many great clips. I think about the John Stewart one of, I had an Apple show and they said that you can't come on. The fear that you were like striking in the hearts of these CEOs, these executives, the power players around the country, of course, around the world. Is that something that we can accomplish as a generation, you think, that that people can start getting scared? Is that something that you're already hearing? Is that our generation especially is waking up and starting to have these very same people afraid again in the same way they were of you?
I mean, I think you do see some recognition, and I think especially in candid moments where, some within the corporate class recognize that there's a real risk to them
Hmm.
of an economy that is so grotesquely unequal. And historically, you've seen major revolutions take place, when you have just an immiseration of people, and people feel like they're not getting a fair shake. And I think there is a real question about, what does it look like to have a social fabric that is, actually promoting democracy and actually stable and secure when people are feeling such an extreme degree of economic precarity. and having to work 2, 3 jobs and still struggling to make rent, to put food on the table. You're seeing people, have to resort to GoFundMe campaigns
Yeah.
to try to make sure that they can get treatment for brain cancer. I mean, especially in a country as well-resourced and wealthy as ours, to see just this extreme economic precarity and sense of deprivation is really grotesque and really immoral. And I think, especially when you see that happening at the same time as you have, CEOs thinking about buying, their second, third private jet, and
Yeah,
just
I
that
thought you were about to say
contrast.
home, and I was like, jet is right. Second, third, private jet is right. It's sad that the word that comes after is jet, not home. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so I do think and hope that we are at a tipping point where that sense of awareness and consciousness is really bubbling up in a way that is going to create even greater momentum for more change.
Well, if scaring Larry and David Ellison is not enough for you, then the idea that our generation can impact change and make things better, which you've proven through your entire career, I hope that should be enough to energize y'all listening right now. Please do join, engage with chapters all over the country are going to be chapters of More Perfect University. And so I want to, I want people to be a part of this movement. So please do get involved. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.